The school bell rang, echoing through the brightly lit hallways. Students shuffled to their seats, chatting and laughing as the morning air buzzed with energy. In the middle of it all sat Maya, a bright, kind-hearted black girl with a love for learning. Today, however, she was about to experience something that would shake the entire school. Ms. Simmons, the substitute teacher, stepped into the classroom with an air of authority. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the students with a sharp gaze. At first glance, she seemed like any other teacher, strict, orderly, and no nonsense. But as the lesson began, a pattern started to emerge. Whenever Maya raised her hand, Ms. Simmons ignored her. When she finally spoke up, the teacher rolled her eyes and sighed, as if exhausted by her mere presence. Maybe if you paid attention, Maya, you'd actually learn something, she sneered. The room fell silent. A few students exchanged glances, but no one dared to speak up. Maya swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her pencil. She had faced unfair treatment before, but this was different. Ms. Simmons didn't just dismiss her, she belittled her, questioned her intelligence, and treated her like she didn't belong. Then came the breaking point. Students like you never amount to much, the teacher muttered under her breath. It was barely audible, but Maya heard it. A cold wave of disbelief washed over her. The class sat frozen, tension thick in the air. No one knew what to say. No one knew how to react. But what Ms. Simmons didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that Maya wasn't just any student. She was the daughter of the school principal. And this time, silence wasn't an option. Little did the teacher realize, the moment she walked into that classroom and chose to single out Maya, she had sealed her fate, because someone was watching, and justice was closer than she thought. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of Ms. Simmons's words settled over her. She could feel the eyes of her classmates flicking toward her, some filled with shock, others with discomfort. No one dared to say anything. It was the kind of silence that made the air feel thick, heavy with something unspoken. Ms. Simmons turned back to the whiteboard, as if what she had just said was nothing more than a passing comment. But Maya knew better. She had faced subtle jabs before, moments when people treated her differently, though they tried to hide it behind fake smiles. This, however, was different. This wasn't subtle. This was deliberate. A few seats away, Jake, one of the more outspoken kids in class, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at Maya, his expression torn between anger and hesitation. He wanted to say something. He always did. But the way Ms. Simmons carried herself, the authority in her voice, made him second-guess. What if speaking up made things worse? For Maya, what if he just got her in more trouble? Maya clenched her jaw, willing herself not to react. She had learned over the years that reacting only gave people like Ms. Simmons what they wanted. But deep down, something inside her stirred, something that refused to be quiet. What Ms. Simmons didn't know was that Maya wasn't alone. Someone else had witnessed everything. Outside the classroom, just passing by, was Chef Anthony, the school's beloved cafeteria chef. He wasn't just someone who made meals. To the students, he was family. He had a way of making everyone feel welcome, like they belonged. And more importantly, he saw things others ignored. He had been on his way back to the kitchen when he caught the tension in the room. Something about the way Maya was sitting, stiff and silent, made him pause. He didn't hear all of it, but he saw enough. He knew that look on Maya's face. It was the same look he had worn once, a long time ago. Instead of walking away, he stepped closer, just enough to listen, just enough to understand what was happening. Inside the classroom, Miss Simmons continued, as if nothing had happened. She paced the front of the room, calling on different students. Everyone except Maya. When Maya raised her hand again, Ms. Simmons barely glanced at her before turning away. "That's enough distractions for today," she said sharply. "Let's focus on the students who actually want to learn." A few gasps echoed across the room. Maya felt her stomach tighten. The unfairness of it all burned in her chest. Chef Anthony didn't wait another second. He pushed open the door, his usually warm and friendly face now serious. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. The entire room turned to look at him, including Ms. Simmons, who seemed slightly startled by his presence. "This is a classroom," she said, forcing a polite but irritated smile. "If you need something, you can—" "I need to speak to Maya," Chef Anthony interrupted, his eyes locking onto hers. "Right now." The way he said it left no room for argument. Ms. Simmons hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Make it quick." Maya stood up, feeling the heat of everyone's eyes on her. She followed Chef Anthony into the hallway, where the tension felt like it could snap in half. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I'm used to it," Chef Anthony sighed, rubbing a hand over his beard. "That's the problem. You shouldn't have to be." Maya looked down, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had spent years learning to push these things aside, to act like they didn't hurt, but they did. "Listen," he continued, glancing back at the classroom. "I don't think she knows who you are." Maya let out a short, humorless laugh. "She doesn't care." "Oh, she will." His tone was different now, steady, certain. "Because we're not letting this slide." Maya looked up at him, searching his face. There was no doubt in his eyes. For the first time that morning, she felt like someone was truly on her side. Back inside, Ms. Simmons continued her lesson, unaware that the quiet storm she had started was about to erupt into something much bigger than she could ever imagine. Chef Anthony took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had seen many things in his years at the school. Students struggling, kids getting into trouble, teachers having bad days. But this was different. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a strict teacher being tough. This was wrong, and he wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. Maya stood beside him in the hallway, silent but watching. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time that day, she wasn't carrying the weight of it alone. Inside the classroom, Ms. Simmons continued her lesson, as if nothing had happened. She barely noticed when the door swung open again, but this time, it wasn't Chef Anthony standing there. It was Principal Carter. The moment Maya saw her father's face, her stomach flipped. He was calm, composed, but she knew him well enough to recognize when he was angry. He didn't have to raise his voice or slam a door to command attention. The room fell silent the second he stepped inside. Ms. Simmons straightened, forcing a polite smile. "Principal Carter," she said, her voice a little too sweet. "What a surprise." "I'm sure it is," he replied, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Maya. "Maya, come here." She stepped forward hesitantly, feeling the weight of the moment. Principal Carter turned to Ms. Simmons. "I understand there's been an issue in this classroom." Ms. Simmons let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, nothing serious. Just a little classroom discipline. You know how kids can be." Principal Carter's expression didn't change. "I do." He paused. "And I also know when a teacher crosses the line." A flicker of nervousness crossed Ms. Simmons's face, but she quickly covered it. "I'm not sure what you've been told, but I assure you, I heard enough." His voice was calm, steady, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. He turned to Maya, Tell me exactly what happened. Maya hesitated for only a second before speaking, and this time she didn't hold back. She told him everything. How Ms. Simmons ignored her, dismissed her, made comments that stung in ways no student should ever have to endure. With every word, the room grew quieter. Some students looked down, guilt creeping into their faces. They had seen it. They had heard it, but they hadn't spoken up. And now, hearing Maya say it out loud, they realized just how wrong it had been. When Maya finished, Principal Carter looked around the classroom. Did anyone else witness this? A few students raised their hands, then a few more, until finally, almost the entire class had their hands in the air. Ms. Simmons' face turned pale. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said quickly. "Kids these days are so sensitive. That's enough." Principal Carter's voice was sharp now. "This school does not tolerate discrimination. Not from students, and certainly not from teachers." The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then, finally, Ms. Simmons sighed, her shoulders dropping. "I didn't mean—" "You did," Principal Carter cut in. "And there are consequences for that." A few hours later, after a full investigation and statements from students, Miss Simmons was escorted off school grounds. She wouldn't be teaching there again. As Maya walked through the hallways, the weight on her chest felt lighter. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced something like this. But today, at least, she wasn't alone. Today, someone had stood up for her. As she passed by the cafeteria, she spotted Chef Anthony wiping down a counter. When he looked up and saw her, he gave her a knowing smile. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, good," he tossed, his rag over his shoulder. "But next time, don't wait for someone else to speak up. You have a voice. Use it." Maya smiled. "I will." And as she walked away, she knew she would never let herself be silent again.